I call the next speaker, the Lord Bishop of Gloucester.
My Lords, I am once again glad to be speaking at this committee stage, and I draw attention to my interests in the register. It is a great honour to follow on from the noble Lord Rosser, and I thank him for his excellent speech. I now rise to speak to Amendment 151 in my name. This amendment seeks to ensure migrant victims of abuse have access to refuge spaces and essential support services, as with other victims of abuse. I thank all the noble Lords, Lord Rosser, Baroness Hamwee and Lord Alton of Liverpool, who've added their names in support of this particular amendment. My Lords, the existing domestic violence DV rule is a proven route for a limited group of survivors, including those on certain spousal and partner visas, ensuring that they are able to regularise their immigration status independent of their perpetrator and can access public funds for a limited time while the application is considered. Since 2002, this has given migrant women a lifeline, an escape route out of abuse, removing the power from abusers who threaten detention, deportation, destitution, and separation from children. However, the current rule excludes survivors who, for one reason or another, are dependent on their perpetrator for their status, or who have other expectations of staying in the country, for example, having settled or British children, or being unable to return to their country of origin due to risk of further harm on return. Extending the DV rule to a slightly larger category of migrant survivors of abuse offers them security in what is often highly complex and challenging situations. As we've heard, the number of additional applications likely to be made per year under an extended eligibility criterion is estimated on the basis of data from Southall Black Sisters and Women's Aid to be in the low thousands. But for those highly vulnerable individuals, the impact would be immeasurable. And at this point, can I add my own thanks to SBS for their excellent and tireless work. The Istanbul Convention has been mentioned previously at this committee stage, and I would like to draw attention to Articles 4 and 59, which, as has been heard, the government has signed and is committed to ratifying. These articles require victims to be protected regardless of their immigration status. This amendment and other presented to your Lordship's House provides an opportunity for the government to take steps in the right direction. Women without secure immigration status find it virtually impossible to access refuge and other welfare support in order to escape abuse. As we've heard, with no recourse to public funds or housing support, they're routinely denied access to safe accommodation and welfare refuge spaces. Only about 5.8% of refuge beds are available for women without recourse to public funds. They're therefore faced with the impossible decision of becoming destitute and homeless and separated from their children, or returning to their perpetrator. This traps many women in abuse that often escalates, creating greater risks and vulnerability. Perpetrators regularly weaponise women's lack of secure immigration status and economic independence to exert absolute control and to keep them in a state of fear, often providing false information, withholding essential documentation, and interfering with applications such that women become overstayers and undocumented as a direct result. As has been repeatedly said across debates, behind every statistic, there is a unique individual. So just one story. Last year, Hamida, not her real name, went to Southall Black Sisters seeking safety and help regarding the return of her child who remained with her abusive partner and seeking assistance in regularising her immigration status. She had no money to support herself or to seek legal advice. She had originally entered the UK from Morocco on a tourist visa, having been persuaded to do so by her British partner. Soon after arriving, she was abused, and her partner began to control every aspect of her life and forbade her from even speaking to anyone. He also put her to work as a carer for an elderly lady and demanded that she gave him all her earnings. She was subjected to sexual violence and rape. When she discovered she was pregnant, her visa had expired and she could not return home, as her family had made it clear that her single mother status would bring disgrace and shame on them. Hamida stayed. She had an Islamic marriage, but continued to be subject to abuse. She had no door key, no phone. Her husband told her that he would never register the baby as British, as it would give her a route to resettlement in the UK. And in the final weeks of her pregnancy, she was kept locked in a store cupboard at his workplace without food. Eventually, she made a disclosure to social services after her husband took the child away from her, and as a result, her child was placed on a child protection register, and Hamida was referred to Southall Black Sisters. This brief portrait illustrates the immense challenges Hamida has faced, and due to her exclusion from the DV rule, she's endured over 9 months of anxiety and uncertainty since escaping violence. She's dependent on donations for her survival, and she has no security about her future. She's unable to process the trauma she's faced, and she remains in ongoing child contact proceedings to reunite with her baby. No survivor deserves to face such trauma and hardship after fleeing violence. And this is just one story. Research has shown that most women on non-spousal visas require assistance for periods between 3 to 8 months, and for some even longer, because they've often had long and complicated abuse and immigration histories. With this bill, we have an opportunity to intervene, to relieve these women of their sufferings, and we must take it. In response to this clear gap, the government announced a 1-year pilot scheme to assess better the level of need for this group of victims and to inform spending review decisions on longer-term funding. However, the 1.4 million offered to run the pilot project is inadequate to meet the needs of all vulnerable migrant women who need crisis support. As an example, the pilot project has set a financial cap on the rent payable for each woman, which is based on local authority housing allowance rates that can be as low as £70 per week. There's also a cap on the subsistence payments that can be made to each woman to meet other basic needs, which cannot exceed £37 a week. These rates are inadequate to avert destitution, not least in even being able to pay for refuge accommodation. Furthermore, as we've heard, it's estimated that the number of migrant survivors who require support is probably between 3,000 to 5,000 a year. The pilot project is likely to provide only minimal support for up to 500 women for a maximum period of 12 weeks only. My next objection is that if this pilot is aiming to collect more data, I would highlight that this has already been submitted by key specialist organisations during the review process. SBS and the Latin American Women's Rights Services published a formal and detailed response to the Home Office's Migrant Victims of Domestic Abuse review in September 2020. As far as I'm aware, there's still been no response. Thirdly, the pilot project has failed to allow for the impact of Brexit, which it's expected to lead to a significant increase in the numbers of women who will be excluded from protection, as they will now be subject to the same immigration rules as non-EU nationals, including restrictions on recourse to public funds. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, this pilot scheme does not guarantee that any lasting change will follow when the scheme's ended. Running a pilot that gives no long-term assurance of anything in the bill at the end of it is not an option. Only legislative protection for this vulnerable cohort of women will ensure this bill delivers its promise as landmark legislation, which can deliver protection for all survivors in the UK. This bill provides the government with a significant opportunity to address the gaps in protection for migrant women with insecure immigration status. As a Christian, I'm called to love my neighbour and to welcome the stranger. This includes showing mercy and justice towards refugees and immigrants, perhaps especially so to those whose hope has been extinguished by abusive partners.